Diane Keaton's two adopted children, Duke and Dexter, were only revealed to the public in a stunning light after her death, despite her undying love for them. After writing her will dividing her assets between Dexter and Duke in 2024, Diane's health took a nosedive due to a string of ailments including skin cancer, eating disorders, and pneumonia. Diane felt pressured into selling the Brentwood home she had loved for 15 years as her mother's health declined, and her two children abandoned her in the deserted house. Without an embrace or a commitment to come back, she saw them depart. The words Diane left behind in her diary, discovered after her death, have silenced the globe. My affection was unconditional. Love, though, may not have been sufficient to keep anyone from leaving. My sons Dexter and Duke have grown tired of calling me mom. How did Diane manage to spend her last months alone? The adoptive children betrayed her love in what ways? Take a look at the movie. Diane Keaton sat in her old Los Angeles home's living room, illuminated by the warm golden light, a year before she passed away at the age of 78. The garden's orange trees filtered the afternoon sun, which fell in soft splotches on the weathered wooden floor. There was a huge stack of papers on the table, legal documents, and the tarnished fountain pen that she had faithfully used for many years. The sound of the clock ticking in the corner was audible to her because of how quiet it was. That day, she put her pen to paper, officially ending her life as we knew it. For months, she had struggled with the decision, caught between logic and emotion, between a life in the limelight and an empty heart. Diane Keaton accumulated a fortune of $100 million throughout her 50 years of Hollywood living, which included artistically charged mansions, photographs, writings, and cherished memories. In the end, she did not have a husband or life partner at her side. She chose to leave her whole estate to her two adopted sons, Dexter and Duke, and put them in a trust. Before she left, she wanted to make sure they were financially secure and could feel their mother's love even when she couldn't speak to them. Diane nodded in response to personal lawyer John's question about her interest in establishing a foundation. Bequests made to the Keaton Light Foundation, which supports senior artists and single moms in the American film business, should receive 30% of the net assets. Folks who used to be famous, but who passed away in a peaceful manner. She was familiar with those faces and the agony of being overlooked after a fleeting glory. Eyes watering, John scribbled furiously. She continued, "If I can leave anything, let it be something gentle, not for me, but for those who have never stood in the light." She sat in silence, feeling a lightness in her chest, while John read aloud each clause. If she wished to add anyone else to the will, he inquired. Then she shook her head in disapproval. "No. The people who have come and gone from my life have all had their fair share. The memory of Al lingers. In the midst of my insanity, there are two children in my heart and Woody, the one aspect that defies monetary valuation." John asked politely, "Would you like to leave a personal message?" She paused to consider her options before responding. "If the two ask who I left more to, write that I divided my love fairly only in the way each one needed. One needed the past, and the other needed the future." After the necessary steps were taken, she signed her name, Diane Hall Keaton. Though it quivered, her signature was unmistakable and unwavering. Even though she had signed countless contracts and thousands of photographs throughout her life, the weight of the document had never seemed so heavy. Maybe it was because this was her first official decision to uproot her whole existence. She felt an unfamiliar sensation in her heart, neither happiness nor despair. Finishing the performance seemed like a grand finale, when the director made the decision to cut the last lines of the will, which she peered down at, read, "To my children Dexter and Duke, with love always." The letters quivered with her shaking hand. At that instant, she realized a significant part of her life had come to a close. Later that night, Diane had a glass of red wine while sitting by the window. Photographs of a smiling Dexter, cradled in her mother's arms when she was 10 years old, were displayed on the table. And Duke is a small boy, often hiding behind her skirt whenever strangers appeared. "I've taken care of you," she whispered, voice choked. "I just hope you understand. Money was never what I wanted to leave the most." But Diane did not know that this decision about the will would bring countless sorrows into her life. The truth is that Diane loved her two adopted children deeply. From adopting Dexter in 1996, then Duke in 2001, Diane Keaton had stepped into a completely new chapter of her life. For years as an actress, she had played countless women, lovers, lonely women, dreamers. But only when holding Dexter in her arms did she truly understand what it meant to live for someone else. Diane learned to be a mother alone bit by bit through sleepless nights and mornings filled with children's laughter. She later said, "I don't think I knew how to be a mother. I had an innate ability to adore my children no matter what. Those first few years were the hardest. On many occasions, Diane would hold a kid as she read scripts, made milk, or learned to identify the signs of hunger, pain, or simply a want to be held. She would spend the entire night by the bedside when Dexter was ill, covering her forehead with a cold cloth and softly singing a song whose name she couldn't recall. Diane was well into her 50s when Duke approached her, but she played the fool, saying, "I may not be young anymore, but I still know how to hold a child without letting them fall." The two kids spent their childhoods in a house brimming with books, film photographs, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. She instilled in them the importance of considering things from a more emotional rather than purely rational perspective. Even when her children got older, Diane never broke the habit of sending them letters in the mail. Her desk drawer was a repository for unsent letters. One of them read, "Dexter, you taught me to listen. Duke, you taught me patience. Thank you both for giving me a role I never want to end." After a hectic day on set, she would bring back little stones and hastily take in some photos. Like the nightlights in the ancient house, Diane's love for the two youngsters was calm and unassuming, unlike her dramatic plays. She continued, "So that later, wherever you go, I still remember home." She told a close friend something once. "Being a mother is a privilege, not a chore, as some may argue. They brought a new aspect of my being into the world, even though I didn't give birth to them. Maybe it was that love, unadulterated and unrecognized, that did it." Diane Keaton gave her most stunning performance in that role, but Diane's children were estranged from her as they became older, even though she loved them very much. The high point occurred immediately following the creation of the 2024 will. Strangely, Diane Keaton's red brick mansion in Brentwood, where she had resided for more than 10 years, seemed deserted. As before, the windows let in the warm sunlight. While the old black and white pictures remained on display, the sound of Dexter and Duke's laughter had faded. Many times, she would sit by herself at the lengthy wooden table, gazing across to the vacant seat opposite her. Once upon a time, this house was the epicenter of romance, holiday cheer, jazz, and hearty meals. At present, it only reverberated the breeze via solid brick walls. In the aftermath of Diane's wealth division, which left the trust to her children, things appeared to improve. That, she reasoned, would suffice, a mother tending to her children right up until the very end. But silence crept into the relationship as time went on. Phone calls decreased. Short visits were the norm. On certain days, she would sit at the gate and wait for a car. But all she would get was a brief text message. "My mother, I am occupied. Maybe we can reschedule later." Dexter showed up one afternoon. She looked more serious than normal. She told her mother straight out that the Brentwood mansion was too expensive and too large, and that she should sell it and give the money to the kids. In an instant, Diane was paralyzed. As she playfully referred to it, the Pinterest house. This house was more than just a residence. It was the product of a lifetime of hard work and appreciation for architecture and the careful selection of each individual brick. Everything was etched in her memory. With the Italian wood dining table, the chandelier salvaged from an Arizona antique store, and the sofa where Duke spent every summer reading. But suddenly it felt like everything was just an item. A quiet and distant Duke arrived later. He spoke up, telling his mother, "Mom, this house is beautiful, but it's no longer where we belong. You should think about the future." Diane was silent throughout. She got it. Maybe it was just property to her kids, but to her it was a treasured memory. She sat by the window that night, watching the garden lights go out. As it rustled the white drapes, the wind fluttered among the rose plants. At home, she had a sense of insignificance she hadn't felt in years. Similar like when she signed the will, Diane's hand quivered when she signed the paperwork to sell the house. She reasoned that everything went back to square one. There will be no sharing of meals, no laughing, and no kids. Someone else's residence would be that one. Maybe they'd redo the wall paint, remove the rose garden, and put in new tiles. Aware, yet, that its spirit belonged to her. The moments she spent reading scripts at night, brewing coffee in the mornings, or teaching her children to draw with charcoal on the kitchen table were irreplaceable. The year 2024 marked Diane's final public outing. Those closest to her started to notice the strange quiet by October 2025 after she had faded from public view. The first illness that forced Diane Keaton to face her own fear of dying was skin cancer. She had never worried about keeping her skin safe when she was younger. Being young meant basking in the California sun. Extensive filming in natural settings, which the Hollywood industry of the era held in high esteem. She failed to notice the unusual patches on her skin until she was in her mid-30s. A crimson mark that will not fade, a tiny bump. She was taken aback by the biopsy findings. Although it is still in its early stages, basal cell carcinoma should not be ignored. She had to cut out the damaged skin, which left a little scar that she expertly concealed with cosmetics. However, that was not the end of the sickness. Surgery was once again necessitated when squamous cell carcinoma developed on her cheek a few years down the road. Diane commented, "I thought it was just a freckle," during an interview. "But it turns out my body had been speaking for a long time and I refused to listen." Illness completely changed her lifestyle. Diane began wearing long-sleeved shirts, wide-brimmed hats even on cloudy days, always carrying sunscreen. But the damage was already evident. Her skin had become more fragile, prone to inflammation and sensitive to light. Some mornings, even sunlight filtering through the window made her cheek ache. The spot where she had undergone surgery. Once celebrated for her classic beauty, she now had to avoid light, live slowly, and be careful with every step outside. She once said, "I spent my youth in the sun, and now I spent half my later life hiding from it." At the same time, another illness, an eating disorder, gradually eroded Diane's physical and mental strength. She admitted having suffered from it early in her career when the pressure to maintain a perfect figure made her obsessed with her weight. Some days Diane would eat an enormous amount. Pizza, bread, ice cream, anything she could find, and then immediately try to release it from her body by any means. It was a vicious cycle of guilt and fear. Although later treated, the damage left by bulimia was long-lasting. A weakened digestive system, worn teeth, and a body out of nutritional balance. She confessed to the Economic Times, "It was my way of punishing myself simply for not being perfect as people wanted." Old age arrived with many after effects from those years. Diane became increasingly thin. Her muscles weakened. Her bones ached when the cold came. Friends recalled that in her final months, she barely had the strength to walk the dog, a habit that had once brought joy every morning. Her body lost weight rapidly. Her skin turned pale and dry, and her voice became. She still tried to hide her fatigue with a faint smile and her familiar wide-brimmed hat. But anyone who knew Diane understood that her vitality had faded. Pneumonia finally delivered the last blow. But long before that, for many years, it had been the wounds from the sun, from the eating disorder, and from loneliness itself that silently drained the woman's strength. Yet, in her spacious Los Angeles home, no one lived with her. No caregivers, no visiting friends, only old photographs and a few letters never sent. Dexter and Duke, the children Diane once cherished, taught to write, taught to love beauty, now had their own lives. They no longer kept in frequent contact with their mother. And there seemed to be unspoken things between them. After the inheritance division strained relationships, both avoided mentioning her in interviews, avoided visiting the old house, and even cut ties with close friends who had come to care for Diane. "They told me not to call anymore," a longtime friend recalled, saying that doctors and managers weren't necessary, that she was fine. But everyone knew she was far from fine. In the late summer days, Diane often sat by the window, curled in a thick blanket, looking out at the withered rose garden. She had once tended the flowers every morning. Now she barely had the strength to look. Doctors advised that someone be present, but she quietly said, "No need. I don't want to trouble anyone." In reality, no one was allowed to come, not nurses, not housekeepers. The two children, citing cost management, had requested no personal doctor, no housekeeper, no overnight stays. She still tried to take care of everything herself. In the morning, Diane sipped a cold cup of coffee, opened her notebook, and wrote a few short lines. "I am still here. The world is still beautiful, but it is too quiet." In the afternoon, she tried to step into the garden, watching sunlight fall on the red bricks she had personally chosen when building the house. That house had once been a dream. Now it had become an empty, cold shell. Some days she called her children's names only to hear the sound echo between the walls. Dexter, Duke. The names came out softly like a breath, then vanished into the void. Old friends often knocked on the door, bringing food, medicine, or simply wanting to sit with her for a while. But the gate was always closed. They received short texts from her children. "Mom needs to rest. Please do not disturb." No one knew that inside Diane was left alone with weak breaths and persistent coughs. She had once been a strong, independent woman, but old age and illness slowed everything down, making life heavier than ever. On sleepless nights, she watched her old films. Annie Hall, Something's Got to Give, The Godfather, laughing softly. Sometimes she asked herself, "That girl? Was she happy?" Then she would fall silent. The screen's light highlighted her gaunt face, eyes still clear but full of sorrow. No one beside her, no voice calling mom, no hand holding hers, only memories and the fragile breath of a woman who once captivated the world. Early on October 11, 2:25, a neighbor reported not seeing Diane in the garden as usual. Later that day, Los Angeles emergency services were called to her home around 8:08 am in Brentwood and transported her by ambulance to the hospital. When staff entered the house, they found her sitting on a chair, a blanket draped over her, a notebook open beside a cold cup of coffee. By the time she arrived at the hospital, it was too late. Diane passed away at age 79. Her love for the two adopted children, Duke and Dexter, began years earlier. In a 1996 interview, Diane half-jokingly said, "I never married. I don't distrust males for no reason. I just don't trust them to put up with me." The remark made audiences laugh, but behind it lay a sad truth. For Diane, marriage had never been a happy ending, only a role she did not want to play. She had loved, believed in lasting love beyond the spotlight. But when it all fell apart, the only thing left in her was the desire to be a mother. By the age of 50, many said Diane Keaton was too late to have children. But she believed her heart had never aged. She quietly went to an adoption center, hidden beneath her familiar fedora and black sunglasses. "Hollywood will mock me again," she told a close friend. "But this time I don't care." When holding her first child, Dexter, in her arms, Diane was speechless. The baby looked at her with clear, calm eyes, neither afraid nor distant. In that moment, Diane saw herself again. The little Keaton in 1955, standing in the schoolyard waiting for her mother, trembling yet full of hope. "We will live together," she whispered to the child. "I don't promise to be perfect. However, I assure you that I will not abandon you." 5 years down the road, Duke, her second kid, arrived, a fiery, energetic boy with curly hair, and the social worker questioned, "Are you sure? 2 children will be a big challenge." Diane just smiled. "I've survived 3 decades in Hollywood. Nothing scares me anymore." But she was wrong. Being a mother, she realized, has no script, no lighting, no one to adjust your hair or makeup when you collapse from exhaustion. Some nights Diane sang to the children in a hoarse voice, then wept in the dark. Some mornings she arrived at the set with dark circles under her eyes, pretending she was fine. I have played hundreds of roles, she wrote. Al Pacino's lover, Woody Allen's betrayed woman, but being a mother is the only role I never want to end. Dexter grew calm and gentle while Duke was fiery and impulsive like a mirror reflecting the intense part of her soul. Once when Dexter was 8, she asked, "Mom, why don't I have a father?" Diane just smiled and stroked her hair. "Because I haven't found anyone good enough to be your father." The child nodded and whispered, "Then I will protect you." Diane turned away, hiding her tears. She did not know that such pure love would eventually change. Hollywood still beckoned, still celebrated her as an immortal icon. But when the lights went out, the cold truth remained. Diane Keaton, the woman who once made the world believe in strength, lived and left alone. Perhaps deep inside, Diane understood that loneliness never truly disappears. It only changes form into the cold face of a daughter leaving in anger or the choking cry of a son. "You don't understand me, Mom." Yet, amidst these seemingly lost moments, there were still times that made Diane Keaton's life worthwhile. Dexter laughed when she clumsily baked cookies. Duke hugged her while watching The Godfather and asked curiously, "Mom, did you really like Al Pacino?" Diane laughed and replied, "Yes, but I've moved past it." When the two looked at each other and laughed, she realized that this was the truest part of her life. Not the red carpet, not the Oscars, not the elegant white gowns, only the small kitchen, the smell of morning coffee, and the word mom calling in peace. But peace was never permanent in Hollywood. That world never lets go of anyone, especially those seeking true happiness. Diane was right to think so. Only a few years later, the children who had been her lifeline became the greatest challenge of her life. If there was a final confession, it would be that of a woman who dared to love, to raise, to fail, and dared to speak her truth before leaving this world. Dexter, gentle and quiet, always made the house silent when she smiled. Diane taught her piano art, hoping she would find her own world. Each night, seeing her child reading under the lamp, she saw her younger self. A girl afraid of noise, wanting only to hide in her own world. But then Hollywood pulled her away. In 2001, while filming in New York, Diane spent 12 hours on set, 3 hours traveling between cities, leaving only a few hours to mother. Dexter was only 11 and began to grow silent. She plastered her room with posters of rock bands her mother had never heard of. She wrote in her diary, locked it, forbidding anyone to read. Diane thought it was just adolescence. Until one December night in 2011, returning home late, still in makeup and costume, she found Dexter at the kitchen table. "Headphones?" Diane asked. "Have you eaten?" He took off his headphones, gave her a direct look, and then remarked, "You only ask because you have to." After she asked again, this time louder, the child still didn't respond. "You never truly belonged here." Diane was taken aback. She said in a low voice, "I work for you, Dexter." The boy interjected with an incisive rebuttal. Diane had never been so wounded by words before. "You work for yourself because you don't know how to live without applause." While her daughter swung her back and slammed the door so forcefully that it rocked, she remained motionless. On that particular evening, Diane reclined on the couch, engrossed in the echoes of her daughter's solitary guitar. It was in the dark that she had the epiphany that she had forgotten how to love another person since she had become accustomed to being loved. The gap between Diane and Dexter only grew wider in the subsequent years. On television, Diane was still the embodiment of grace, wearing her hat and smiling radiantly. She was a quiet tempest on the inside, though. Diane took Dexter to the Golden Globes in 2004 when she was 15 years old. Their stunning mother-daughter combo was hailed by the press as the most glamorous in Hollywood. While Diane stayed silent, Dexter said, "I hate how everyone looks at me like I'm my mother's jewelry." They were on their way home. For a long time, that comment hung over her. Dexter started to rebel in 2015. She expressed her desire to forego her mother's dream of pursuing an art degree in favor of a life of travel. In response, Diane raised an objection. "Am I to transform you into an exact replica of myself, a solitary woman amidst a mishmash of headwear?" Dexter angrily proclaimed the man. At that very moment, Diane slapped her, not forcefully, but enough to stab her heart. In response to her daughter's direct statement, "No, you just want safety so you won't have to fear." Diane's voice trailed off as she confided in her daughter, "I just want you to have a safe future." Tears flowing down Dexter's face, he turned and walked away. Mother and daughter went silent for 3 weeks. Diane reprised her role as a single mother in a different film 2 years later. As a symbol of feminism, she was lauded by the media. "You never understood me," Diane's co-star said in one scene, and she broke down in tears. Reason being, the words were genuine and not because of the part. Everyone applauded when the director yelled out cut. Nevertheless, she merely knelt, quivering, as she pondered whether anyone had recognized her genuine tears amidst the thunderous ovation. The American Film Institute presented Diane with the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2017. The stage was ablaze with lights and resounding applause, but the front row, where Dexter typically sat, was deserted. She thanked everyone and kept smiling, but deep down, she felt like none of the attention had mattered. After work that night, she returned home, retrieved an old bottle of wine from the refrigerator. With each sip, she emptied her glass. While Diane was under the influence of alcohol, she had an epiphany: she could play any part, except that of an ideal mother. People in 2021 wanted to know if Dexter was proud of her marriage. Yes, she said with a smile, but her worry was palpable, because she was aware that her daughter had finally emerged from her shadow. People have always said that she is a woman who doesn't require a man. However, few were aware that she had given up her job, her celebrity, and even a piece of herself in order to become a mother. Prior to the arrival of Duke, the younger adoptive son, she believed she had suffered through enough of the anguish of a mother. Upon Duke's first birthday in 2001, she made the decision to adopt him. Dexter was 5 years old when she was filming Town and Country. Duke brought the home to life with his radiant smile, gentle curls, and infectious laughter. The opportunity to begin anew was, in her eyes, a divine gift. Her heart would light up with joy every time she heard him call Mom. It was as if time could turn back, after she had taught him to ride a bike and play the piano. The house, which had been chilly before, became very warmed. She pondered perhaps peace had finally arrived. Yet children grow faster than one expects. In 2013, right around Duke's 12th birthday, his eyes started to alter, concealing an anger and an unidentifiable remoteness. He began avoiding his mother and missing class as a result of his arguments with professors. She saw him drinking, smoking, and posting explicit films online one night when he was out with pals. She cried out in despair, asking, "What are you doing with your life?" In response, Duke flung his rucksack to the ground and said, "Don't pretend you understand. All you know is acting." Those words pierced her heart like a knife. Exactly what Dexter had once said years ago. In 2015, Duke ran away from home for the first time. Police found him on Malibu Beach drunk, shivering in the cold rain. She rushed there, heart pounding in her chest. When she arrived, Duke sat on the sand, head bowed in silence. She did not scold him, only draped a coat over him and gently asked, "Are you cold?" Duke replied, voice choked, "Go home." She said, "No, I will stay." He looked up, tears blending with the rain. "If you really wanted to stay, you would have been here a long time ago." She froze. He was not talking about that night, but about the past 15 years, the years she had been absent from his life. She hugged him, but he did not hug back. At that moment, she realized some distances cannot be bridged, even by a mother's love. A week later, Duke returned to school, but only a few months after he dropped out again. Every conversation between mother and son became heavy like silent knives. One afternoon, when she caught him smoking on the porch, she snatched the cigarette from his hand and shouted, "You can't destroy yourself like this." Duke looked straight into her eyes, speaking coldly. "You have no right to say that." He left behind a dense cloud of accusations that seemed to go on forever as he walked away. In 2019, Duke was involved in a small vehicle accident. She hurried to the hospital and remained by his side throughout. Upon awakening, he cried out to his mom, whispering, "Don't cry. No, you're not fine. And I no longer need to be an ideal mother," she said, her voice quivering as she regained her composure. "I had enough." After a lengthy period of silence, she finally spoke up. "Do you hate me?" Duke finally broke down and said, "No, I just don't know how to love you." She realized exactly what he meant, and he started to cry. Fear and hurt had buried his love, but it had never truly vanished. Everyone stopped moving because of the 2020 pandemic. There were just the two of them at the Los Angeles house. They were practically silent companions for months. They ate their noodles by candlelight one night since the electricity went out. Duke looked at her with a mischievous grin and said, "I hate being stuck at home, but if I have to be somewhere, this is still the safest place." She then asked, "Are you still planning to leave?" To which Duke answered, "Yes, but not to run from you, to find myself again." The glow of the fire on his face brought back fond memories of their past. Diane Keaton's health declined considerably in 2023 as she murmured, "If you find yourself again, don't forget to look back. I'm still here." Her locks had become all white. Her trembling hands and sluggish gait betrayed the burden of years past. At one point in her life, she was a powerful woman who would proudly exit vehicles while wearing a broad, brimmed hat, a brilliant smile, and sparkling eyes. But now she was fatigued from simply standing up. Even though she had to hold on to the railing to down the steps, she continued to make her own coffee every morning and care for the flowers in the garden corner. Only on rare occasions did her relatives pay her a visit, and her neighbors seldom saw her outside. As before, everything in the red brick house was lovely. It was only the owner who was gradually disappearing. Duke, her beloved son, unexpectedly expressed a desire to go from the United States and embark on a journey to Europe in search of a more authentic life. In an instant, Diane was paralyzed. As she met his gaze, she could see both the nostalgia for her younger self and the specter of her impending departure in his eyes. With a wobbly voice, she inquired, "How long will you be gone?" Duke spoke up. "I am uncertain. It could be a few months or it could be forever," she whispered. As he firmly spoke, he embraced her and said, "I'm scared, Duke." On the day Duke departed, Diane felt the chill of the cold wind whipping through her white hair as she shook and whispered, "I know, but I never learned to trust that. Don't be afraid. I told you leaving doesn't mean not loving." As she held on to his hand tightly, She watched him depart for the airport, as if releasing it would allow the wind to whisk away all she had. "Remember to give me a call," she said. Duke grinned. "I will call every day," she said, her voice quivering. "Whenever you feel my absence." After that, he averted his gaze, his rucksack slung over his shoulder, and he slipped away behind the security barrier. Diane had an unpleasant realization at that same time. A person can still leave even if you love them. Waiting becomes an eternity as a result. Still, she did nothing. The phone remained silent day after day. Nobody got a message. She had a severe decline in health in 2024. She had short, shallow breaths and a persistent cough due to pneumonia. The visits from her eldest daughter, Dexter, were few and uninviting, but they did occur. "Mom, you should think about selling this house," she pointed out. "Why keep it if it's expensive?" Diane remained silent. She knew the house was not just a residence but a place holding her soul. But seeing her daughter's eyes cold as glass, she just nodded slightly. That nod felt like signing her own sentence of loneliness. Then one morning in October 2025, a neighbor noticed Diane's house had been closed for 3 days. No lights, no barking. No one answered when knocking. When police forced the door, they found her sitting in the chair by the window in her usual position. Blanket across her legs, notebook open on the table, coffee gone cold. She had quietly passed away, as if merely napping for a moment. No one knew exactly when she died. Perhaps the night before, perhaps 2 days earlier, only that no one was beside her. When the news spread, people expected a grand funeral worthy of a legend's reputation. But Dexter and Duke declared that Mom wouldn't want noise and quietly held a private cremation, inviting no friends, notifying no media. A few close colleagues called to attend but were all refused. Some said they wanted to save funeral costs to complete the estate division faster. Only a few wreaths were hastily placed. A small handful of ashes quietly sent to the family cemetery with no eulogies, or anyone calling her name one last time. The red brick house was later put up for sale. All of Diane's mementos, photos, books, paintings, even her beloved hat were cleared away. When the new buyers visited, they said the house was beautiful but had a strangely sad feeling. Perhaps they did not know that this had once been the world of a woman who had lived fully, loved, lost, and in the end was forgotten by the very people she had called family. And so 2025 closed in a painful silence. Diane Keaton passed away alone, without noise, without lights, with no one to see her off. Only the last words she had written in her diary remained. "I loved with all my heart." But perhaps that love wasn't enough to keep anyone here. Diane Keaton left this world quietly. But her legacy never faded. Throughout her life, she lived and loved in her own way. A single mother raising 2 children with deep love, a courageous artist, and a woman daring to confront the dark corners of herself. Even when in the end those she loved most left her, Diane chose to keep the one thing that could not be sold, her kindness. The story of Diane Keaton makes one wonder sometimes. Does great love make a person lonelier?